Found in Translation, The Unexpected Origins of Place Names is a new tome by Duncan Madden. It unravels the tangled threads of history and etymology to uncover the strange, intriguing, and enlightening stories that have shaped the names of countries around the world. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from Cologne as well. Author of Found in Translation, Duncan Madden. Duncan, good morning to you and Happy New Year.
Good morning, sir. Happy to you too. Feliz Navidad.
Oh, as they say, it's very good indeed. You spent some time in Barcelona. You were telling you spent some time.
That's right. Yeah, yes. I've certainly. Barcelona remains my favourite city in the world. So yeah, I'm there as often as possible, and have spent some extended periods there over the years. Lots of good friends there. Any city with a beach like that is a place where I want to live. Basically.
Right, fair enough. Well, that's the beach in Barcelona. It is quite something. I can hear my listeners in Benidorm going, "We got a beach too. We got a beach as well. Don't worry about that." You're a travel writer mainly by profession. So what sparked this interest? Was it a thought of, well, how did this place get its name? Was that the?
I mean, you're right. I've been a travel writer for many years, but I've also been, a lover of language. When I grew up, I had one of those mothers that was, if I didn't know what a word meant, she was pick up the dictionary, read it, learn it, you'll remember it. And I think she sparked in me a kind of love of an interest in linguistics and the meanings of words. And then as I started traveling more and more, different place names, some of the places you go, the names are just downright weird, right? They just sound odd or they look odd. And, I have an inquisitive mind, and I just started paying a bit more attention to places as I visited. And then I wrote an article about it a few years ago for Forbes in the US. And off the back of that article, thought, hang on, this is something that hasn't really been done before. There's lots of books on etymology and linguistics and stuff, but not particularly on travel. And I wanted to make it a bit more accessible to the masses, if you like. A lot of the kind of etymological stuff, linguistic stuff, can be very heavy, very dry.
Dusty? Should we say dusty?
Dusty. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be crusty and dusty. I think would be a good way to describe it. Yeah. And I wanted to make it a bit more, a bit more fun, a bit more travel-y and stuff. So, the book is a kind of a travelogue. It's a journey around the world. And it's just stopping at different countries that most of the countries I have visited, not all of them. And just, how they got their names, what those names mean, the stories behind them. And the more I wrote, the weirder they got for many of them. It just kind of snowballed, and suddenly, the pandemic was here, and I was kind of 250 pages in and thought, this is it. I'm going to be done soon. I'll have a book, and here we are.
But please, sir, wasn't it just it doesn't all go back to the Romans, sir? Because I mean, presumably, what have they ever done for us? But they gave us most of the names, surely.
Well, they gave us a lot of the names, but most of the names, there was a whole world long before the Romans existed. So a lot of the names go back way, way, way before then. So yeah, we're talking, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, some 4,000 or 5,000 BC. I mean, Iberia is a great example, right? The Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal, founded by, first settled by some people from Africa, came up called the Iberes, and their name is what became Iberia. So this was, several thousand years before the Romans had even kind of were a glint in their parents' eye, if you like. Yeah,
haven't even built a straight bit of paving at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Presumably, though, when it comes to naming your country, if you do, I mean, does it sort of just develop, or like Azerbaijan, for example? And isn't it land of fire or something? And that sounds something like that. That sounds like very sort of. I can imagine them sitting around and going, "Okay, we're going to call ourselves, not land of the pleasant smelling flowers, but land of fire. Like land of iron or land of giants or something like that."
I would say most of them develop. A lot of them feel and sound like they might be random, but they are not random, but they are affected by random things, which sounds like a slight contradiction in terms I know. But so something like Azerbaijan, as you pluck it out of the air, is the name, I believe, comes from Zoroastrianism, which is the religion that was founded there, which was based on an obsession with fire. A lot of countries that have deep history, that are kind of not modern history, but go back to times, really olden times, pre-written language, a lot of the case. So, a lot of where languages are just purely oral. The people that lived in those countries, they named things based on what they saw visually, and they were the elements were things that were kind of, beyond their understanding, were power, Fire, obviously, massively important. Zoroastrianism born out of the kind of religion and the love of fire, and Azerbaijan has this extraordinary geographic phenomena where these fires just kind of burn in the countryside as gas pockets are released, and so it became Land of Fire. Azerbaijan were quite smart; they've used that as a great marketing tool. Why wouldn't you? Land of Fire, it makes it sound exciting, makes it sound exotic. But you'll find that that's often the case. Lots and lots of countries are named for geographical features, named after mountains, rivers, stuff like that, and other countries take their names. More modern countries, especially post colonialism, a lot of countries have created names based on their new identities, or they've reached back into the histories of the kind of the indigenous peoples and tried to incorporate and revamp the kind of the values and the strengths of the indigenous peoples. Other countries have just gone outright mad and created kind of interesting and weird and mad names that work really well. So
we'll save the mad ones to the end, I think, because I like a bit of madness.
There are plenty.
Jolly good. But it's interesting you brought, because that was going to be my next question, honestly, was post-colonial, because, Ayers Rock, for example, I grew up, I'm a 70s schoolboy, I grew up, with A, Rhodesia, sorry about that, and B...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's 70s, before Zimbabwe became Zimbabwe, and B...
I'm a 70s child as well.
Oh, yeah, and B, and it's I think it's the hairstyles, and the B... the grey, yeah. And they'll just look distinguished. And B, Ayers Rock, for example, Australia. Now, Australia is a place that is quite rightfully reclaiming the names that were given to it by the empire.
Very much so, yeah. So Ayers Rock is Uluru in indigenous Aboriginal language, isn't it? I believe. But you'll find that. I mean, across Africa and particularly Africa and Asia, there are a lot of countries that have much newer names based on exactly this post-colonialism. Burkina Faso is a great one. The name plucked by their leader of the time, known as the Che Guevara of Burkina Faso, and that country name means the land of upright and honest men, or something along those lines, with some transliteration in there. And that Thomas Sankara, the guy who named that, he used that name. He used two indigenous languages from the indigenous peoples of the area before it was Burkina Faso, put those two together and created this name, which is, it's got a good marketing appeal. I think it's one of the smarter names. It makes the country sound honest and upright, and it represents the kind of the indigenous peoples really well. It gives them their own say. It gives them identity, and it's cool sounding to a Western ear. So what's not to like? So yeah, there are lots of those all the way across. A lot of these countries, were under colonial rule by Germans and Belgians, French, British, and so their names were just reflections of that. They were called territories of Germany and territories of the UK and stuff. So yes, a lot of those are really, really new. And if you've got an opportunity to name a country, do something cool with it, right? Don't just, go for something boring. Go for something mad out there, something attention grabbing. That's where I'd be going.
Yeah, and I mean, and it does install that pride of a people or of a nation. I mean, we can have debates about nations till the proverbials come home, but if if you're an emerging nation, from I was going to say Indochina, which dates me as well, but from Southeast Asia, for example, those names discovering something, because we forget there's the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century. It shows this colonialism, and it's all going. So these places have to have new names, but also there are. We've talked about the Land of Fire, but there are also place names that describe the actual physical attributes of the people. We were talking hairstyles a bit earlier, but isn't there a frizzy head? Isn't there? It's got to be somewhere.
Papua New Guinea.
Yes.
And again, we have to, I think it's important here to sound a note of kind of caution, or at least look at it with a modern sense as well. A lot of these names that have been around for a long time were given by the kind of explorers, by the old ancient monarchies, by colonialists, by the church and stuff like this. And a lot of them are, would be considered pejorative. Now, you would never have a name like the land of frizzy haired people now, because it just sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? But I'm
thinking certain parts of Liverpool, to be honest with you, but there you go.
Yeah. That is dating you to the 90s.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, that's all right. Yeah, so for example, Papua New Guinea was named again by a Portuguese sailor, and he when he first sailed past, he thought that the people there, dark-skinned, looked like the people that he had encountered in Guinea, which is the first time that for many Westerners, many Europeans who are responsible for colonizing much of Africa and Asia, they had not seen people of dark skin before, and so Guinea comes from an old word, Ginawan, and it means of the burnt face. So it's
really of the burnt face.
People. Yeah, so it's literally referring to the people who were dark skinned. And then Papua New Guinea, he saw the people dark skinned again, so he went for the New Guinea. It's another version of Guinea, and the Papua was in reference to the kind of the big crazy hairstyles that the indigenous people had in comparison to his relatively dull, European haircut, basically, probably black and a tiny bit curly, but not like that one. So there are lots of the countries are named for the people or for attributes of the people in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, absolutely.
And also animals. Mali is it correct? Is it hippopotamus?
Oh, Mali is hippopotamus.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You see, I've been following. I've been from on my FIFA PlayStation playing. Mali in the African Nations Cup, and never thought hippo.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's an interesting one, Mali. I don't remember the total details off the top of my head, but again, I think it was just something that was used based on the animal that was kind of all around them at the time. And again, this was a name that was born from we're shaking off the shackles of colonialism, and we're like, what are we going to go for? I'm just thinking, there's a hippo, let's go for that.
Imagine that one. Okay, you name it after the animal you're surrounded with. Okay, so my hippo. If you transcribe that, then the island of the long white cloud would be sheep, basically.
If you saw lots of them in a row, absolutely.
Yeah.
Autoria. Yeah. Well, this is the original indigenous name for New Zealand. I mean, this is a really great example, actually, because New Zealand is obviously it refers to Zeeland, which is an area of the Dutch coast, of the Holland coast, that was given slightly in a roundabout way by the British in the end, and it became New Zealand as it was translated into kind of an English. But actually, Autoria is becoming more and more and more popular and more firmly ensconced back in the kind of modern Kiwis' minds. And there are now it carries pretty much the same weight and the same strength, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere. If you refer to Autoria, people are going to know what you're talking about, maybe perhaps less so in the Northern Hemisphere. But there are now, there are discussions ongoing to actually look to replace New Zealand with Autoria, although I think that's probably unlikely to happen in our lifetimes anyway. But this is a kind of an ongoing discussion. And Autoria, I mean, it's a much more romantic sounding name, isn't it? The land of the long white cloud.
Well,
it's
exactly.
Much more than New Sea area off the coast of Holland doesn't really scream it. And especially because, NZ's one of the most gorgeous and extraordinary countries in the world. So, but it's a good example. But I tell you, going back to the animals, I mean, Spain remains one of my very favourite etymologies, and we should probably mention it as with the nature of your radio show.
Well, indeed, as Spain's largest English language radio station, it would be churlish not to, Duncan.
Very nice, very nice. So I'm not sure if you're aware, and it's one of the sort of slightly odder etymologies, but Spain is, although I should also clarify that etymology is not an exact science. Etymology is based on fact, but it's based on interpretation. It's based on deep research into often complex and conflicting linguistic roots, many of which are often dead ends, many of which aren't written, so have been transferred orally over the years. So like the classic game where you kind of have 10 people in a row and you whisper one sentence to someone at the beginning and you get to the one at the end. Chinese whispers. Yeah, that's also known as Russian something as well. It was previously before.
Actually, I'm not sure I'm not allowed to say Chinese whispers anymore because that goes back to my 70s childhood.
You might be right. Yeah, it might well be pejorative as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so although there are modern scholars that think that Spain is more likely to refer to Spain's deposits in metals or gold or something like this. The original etymology that's considered is that Spain is the land of rabbits.
Yes, I've heard.
Yes, not something you would particularly, it's not the first thing that jumps into your mind when you think of kind of stereotypical Spain images. That's more going to be the Sagrada or a paella or a cold beer on the beach,
fighting bull, etc. But certainly not the fighting bull, exactly. The fighting rabbit of Ronda.
Yeah, when the Phoenicians arrived around about 1000 BC, migrated up from Africa, they got to the Iberian Peninsula. They thought it was an island, not a peninsula. First mistake. Second, they when they landed, they made landfall on the south. They literally the whole landscape was blanketed in rabbits, or as they thought at the time, hyraxes, because they'd never seen a rabbit before. And a hyrax is a kind of rock rabbit that's based in Africa. That's where they're from. And so they were, as we've already discussed, lots of rabbits. What are we going to call this place? Let's call it the land of rabbits. So the word in Phoenician for rabbit was or for hyrax, as they would have called it, was a svan, S-P-H-A-N, or perhaps a tsepan, which is a slight variation on the word. Same etymological source, same etymological outcome. So that it became the land of spans, or Hispania. In their language. And then what was interesting is that when the Phoenicians kind of faded out and the Carthaginians came and the Greeks came and the Romans came, they didn't, as often was the case, just chuck their own name on top of it. They actually all took on that name and used it in a very similar way. So eventually the Spanish took it, the Romans took it and did the classic thing where they dropped the IA on the end, as we get in so many country names around the world. So that IA suffix is a sign of the kind of Roman. So you can see where the Romans influence, even in the modern world, where it came from with the Romans, because that IA means the land of, just like Stan means the land of in Central Asia. So we have Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. That Stan means the land of, just like you have England, Deutschland, land of the Engs, land of the Germans. The IA is a Roman add-on, Latin add-on that means land of. So it became Hispania. And then through transliteration and through certain development over time, through English and French, it became España and then Spain for us. And so that's one of the kind of more interesting and more curious etymologies.
Yeah, I'm particularly lucky because I live in Andalusia. We're based in southern Spain. Okay, and you will see, because of what was referred to by some people as the Reconquest, but we're a part of Al-Andalus, which is obviously 700 years of Moorish rule, etc. And you see, the two things about that is that you get head to Granada and some of the place names are very Arabic, as you'll find in the Basque countries. Pictic, because they weren't invaded. It was Asterix the Gaul, but in the Spanish version, weren't invaded by the Romans. But the other thing is, of course, everything is de la frontera, because as the Christians took back more land, everything became a frontier town.
Frontier.
Yeah. Which leads to one of the greatest bits of misunderstanding, if you'll indulge me ever, Duncan, because a friend of mine came down here and wanted to see this big city because they kept seeing road signs to it all over the place. And I was like, and it's something de la. And I was like, well, could it be Jerez de la Frontera? And I was like, no. And we're trying to work out what it was. And I couldn't, for the life of me, think what this big city was. And we were driving down the road and they said, oh, there it is. And it was Cambio de la Sentido, which means change of direction change in Spanish. They thought there was this massive town when it means, but there you go.
I have a very similar story to that, driving through Germany in the 90s with my dad, and him pointing out the road sign and going, God, this town, Ausgang, is enormous, isn't it? I didn't have the heart to tell him it meant exit off the road.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yes, your friend is not alone in that.
Yes, Ausgang, twinned with Cambio de Sentido. I can see it now.
Exactly. The two biggest cities on
I think
Earth.
we should stand. I think we should stand as mayors, Duncan. I think we'd be a shoo-in. What was the when you realised you had a book, then getting it all down together must have been quite good fun. How did you approach it, and what is your favourite bit of mad naming? I've been a writer all my life, or my professional life, but writing a book, you sort of think, oh, great, yeah, I'm going to write a book. And then when you're suddenly confronted with 280 pages, 80,000 words, you do kind of think, oh my God, I've got to write a book. But I wrote it in lockdown, which actually in some ways helped, because it was just a concentrated period of time sitting on the sofa with a laptop, basically, like everyone else in much of the world. But I've written the book in you can pick it up and read it from cover to cover if you're so inclined, but you can also read every single chapter for each country individually. So I cover 70 countries or so across each of the 6 kind of inhabited continents. And so I've written it in a way that I think that you can pick up and say you're going to Spain, you can pick it up and read the Spain chapter. You don't need to have read anything before or after. But I've also written it with a narrative style to try and give it a kind of sense of story and a sense of coherence throughout. But it's a rabbit hole etymology. Once I started, I thought I'd give myself a day, a chapter to kind of write, but you find yourself just
diving down into these. I can't tell you how much time I spent on JSTOR reading kind of ancient historical texts and trying to work out what the hell they meant and things. But I mean, it's fascinating. If you've got an element of geek in you like I have, it's a fascinating thing. If you love to travel, a lot of people will kind of go to a country and just pick out a few basic facts about that country before they go, just to have some orientation. I would classify this in the same way. I think that it's a really cool thing to have. It gives you a bit of a history of the country, a bit of knowledge about the country. I mean, there are many that I really love. Argentina is if you want a story of just insane daring do and heroic lunacy and, all the things that you could imagine, pirates and gold and cannibals and silver and, all this kind of stuff. Argentina has an amazing story of one man's belief that he could, who was shipwrecked. He spent 9 years shipwrecked in Uruguay, befriending the locals who had eaten all of his mates and all of his kind of co-sailors, because he'd heard a story of a guy living on top of a mountain of silver, not realizing that was the Incas, obviously. Yeah. And he spent 9 years building an army, learning, working out where to go. And then he headed inland with his army to take on the Incas just to get himself some silver. Unbelievably, got into Inca territory, got a load of their silver and got out. And he was sailing back down the Rio de la Plata, which is the river that separates Uruguay from Argentina, the river of silver in Spanish, obviously, because that was the source to get to the point. Unfortunately, some of the indigenous tribes that he had employed changed their mind on the way back and killed him and stole all his silver. But a few people did escape, and they escaped into Argentina. And they came, bearing silver. And so silver became known as the land of silver. But obviously, in that would be in Spanish, right? So that would be, Rio de la Plata. But at the time, all the great cartographers, all the great map drawers of the world were Italian. And they all wrote in Italian. So when they came to hear about it, they heard it was the land of silver. And so they just translated it into Italian, Argentina, from Argent to Latin for silver. And so that's how Argentina got its name. So it's named from a Portuguese sailor living with Spanish language for the silver that was actually in Bolivia. And
given by Italian cartographers.
Yeah, exactly. So you couldn't make it up, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, but if you've met Argentinians, and several very good friends of mine, Argentinian, they are that cosmopolitan and also that crazy as well, as we saw only a few weeks ago.
Well, probably insufferable at the moment, but they deserve it, don't they? So absolutely. But yeah, I love it. I love Argentina as well. It's a great country, but there are lots and lots of stories of just the kind of grit and determination and madness that isn't really available to explorers nowadays. There's still plenty of the world to explore, but not to the level of this. Not where you're going to go and
go on full Fitzcarraldo if you want to.
Exactly, yeah, full Fitzcarraldo, absolutely. But yeah, there are lots of kind of countries with extraordinary names like this, and then there are others that are kind of made up. To serve the benefits of individual people. Some of them have come from times when people wanted to create an awe and a sense of their country. So some wanted to scare them off. There's a great rumor that Iceland is so called because they wanted it to be the land of ice because they didn't want people coming there to see how bounteous it was. So they called that Iceland, and they called the icy country to the north Greenland, to try and send people off. I mean, again, it's a folk etymology. You don't know that it's true, but it's a great story. And there's all of these come from some kind of truth at some point in history. So, and every country, I cover about 70 plus countries in this. So there are another 130-ish around the world.
I feel a part 2 coming on the book.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You've done it.
I need to breathe deep and think about that.
You've done it now. The book is called Found in Translation, The Unexpected Origin of Place Names. It's by Duncan Madden, who we'll be speaking to today. Duncan, if people want to find you online, where can they track you down in the nicest possible way?
Well, they can find me on my website, duncanmadden.com. I'm on social if you look, and I've written enough travel stories over the years that if you stick my name into Google, something I've written is going to pop up. And obviously the book is available on a certain giant global
and it's also available as a download from our own virtual bookstore. So there you go. So we cut out that middleman. The book is called Found in Translation. Sorry, Duncan, I'm going to crash the news, but it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thanks, Giles. Cheers. Bye-bye.